Right.
Probably get a copy and put it on Facebook.
We can't link YouTube to that's the thing. Yeah, you can link YouTube to Facebook.
Look,
And
that's why I was just making a terrified face.
I'm glad I don't understand all that nonsense.
It's not nonsense. How long is your speech,
We'll just have to wait.
Mr.
3 minutes.
McGee? Is this in
All
the
right,
five?
here we go. Have you ever been put on the defensive when witnessing to someone? Because they bring up the fact that Christians can't even agree amongst themselves on what to include in the Bible. Now, some people would use the Apocrypha as an excuse to reject the fact that the Bible is authoritative and inspired both. The Bible is the Word of God, and it is my manual on how to live my life. But there's a good reason for me to look into what exactly should be included in those pages, if in fact I'm going to hold it to that standard. Despite the fact that some people would include apocryphal writings in the biblical canon, Christians should be confident that the Bible is complete without them. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to inform you guys about some of the origins of the Apocrypha and how they relate to the biblical canon. I'm going to give you some definitions of canon and Apocrypha to help you understand what these things mean. I'm going to identify some significant church positions on this subject and also talk to you about some of the criteria for including a book in the biblical canon and why the Apocrypha just doesn't live up to that standard. According to dictionary.com, canon, with one N, canon, is defined as the books of the Bible recognized by any Christian church as genuine. Now, the Apocrypha is defined by that same dictionary as various religious writings of uncertain origin, regarded by some as inspired, but rejected by most authorities. Now, the theologian Elmer Towns takes us a little bit further, and he describes how the Apocrypha isn't really a collection or a unit of books, but rather it is individual books that you really have to look at independently. For that reason, it's pretty hard to define what the Apocrypha really is. The main disagreements on the inclusion of the Apocrypha in the biblical canon, which would be the entire Bible, is between the Protestant and the Catholic churches. Now, the Protestants have never included any apocryphal writings in their canon. However, according to Fawcett's Bible Dictionary, the Catholics included 14 apocryphal writings in the biblical canon at the Council of Trent. Now, Towns points out that the Council of Trent took place in 1546. So this was 1,500 years after Christ walked the earth, and that was at that time that they included these 14 books into their canon. Let's take a look at some of the criteria for acceptance in the biblical canon. And the first thing I'd like to point out is when it comes to Old Testament writings, you have to ask yourself, did the Jews accept it? Now, Norm Geisler, who's a biblical scholar, points out that the Jews were considered the custodians of the Old Testament writings. So what that boils down to is, if the Jews included it in their Hebrew Bible, it's something that we should include in our canon. When it comes to the Apocrypha, none of them were included. The same books that we have in our Bible today, the Old Testament writings, are the same books that would have been in the Hebrew Bible when Jesus was walking the earth. And they didn't include any of these apocryphal writings. The next thing to consider when it comes to New Testament writing, you can see Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper painting here with the disciples of Christ, and that's really what it boils down to. Did the apostles write it? Now, the apostles didn't write all the books that we have in the New Testament canon, but as Elmer Towns points out, that the books of the New Testament, to be considered for the canon, need to be either written by an apostle or by someone with a close relationship to that apostle. And based off of the list that he put together as suggestive apocryphal writings, keep in mind that it's kind of hard to nail down exactly what the whole list of apocryphal writings might be, but in his particular list, none of them claim that sort of authority, and I don't think any of them do. The other thing that he pointed out, and is something that's very significant, is that in order for a book to be considered to be a part of the canon, it needs to be universally accepted by the church. And the apocryphal writings just don't have that. in general, according to Towns, they have isolated and varied support, and most Christians reject them. Now, considering this information, you need to make sure that you don't let the apocryphal writings undermine your confidence in the Bible. And more importantly, don't let other people undermine the authority of Scripture based off of some disputed text, because that's essentially what we have. The reason you can have that confidence is simple. The Old Testament that we have now in our canon is the same Old Testament that the Hebrews had in their Bible, and it did not include any of the apocryphal writings. When it comes to New Testament books, the apocryphal writings just don't carry the authority of the apostles in them. And probably most importantly, they are not universally accepted by the Christian church. They are very much in dispute. The NIV translates 2 Timothy 3:16 as God-breathed, useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness. And as a Christian, you should be confident that the biblical canon that we have now, separate from the apocryphal writings, is the complete God-breathed scripture that this verse is talking about.